Hey friends, welcome to day 4 of our watercolor week. Today is probably my favorite day. We are doing my favorite technique that I use all the time, the wet on wet technique. I promise this one is so much fun. You're gonna have a blast, so make sure you watch the whole video and let's jump in and get started with our exercises. Okay, so today we are jumping into the wet on wet technique for our day 4. I'm also going to be adding in the technique of color bleeds. It's also a lot of fun. So just to go over the basics of what it is, basically what you're doing is you are creating a wet surface and then you are applying wet paint to that surface. And the effects that you get with that is quite mesmerizing and really what the beauty of watercolor is all about. I love to use this technique for creating skies, blurry, out of focus effects. It's just overall really relaxing to do, but also a lot of fun. And then color bleeds is when you place one wet stroke right beside another and they slightly touch and one color bleeds into another. So that's also a lot of fun and can look beautiful in your work. So let me start by going over my supplies today. I am again painting in my Canson XL watercolor sketchbook. I have my Paul Rubens watercolors with me and my Emma Lefebvre Craftimo brush in a size 12 round. I'm also going to be using this mop brush to create a wet background. So if you do have a bigger brush, that is a bonus and really great for this. And if you don't, you can just use whatever brush you have. Okay, so we're going to be starting by doing the wet on wet technique, and this is really great for skies. So this is the first exercise. We're going to create a really beautiful sky effect. Now I'm just going to wet my brush thoroughly, and there's a couple things that you want to keep in mind when doing the wet on wet technique, especially when you're using it for a background. So I'm going to take my fairly wet brush and I'm just going to start applying it to my page. If you would like, you could always tape down your paper because we are using a lot of water with some painter's tape to create a nice border, but it also keeps your paper nice and flat. And you're just going to apply it to the area that you want to create this sky. And this is not going to be your final painting or anything, just we're playing around. Okay, so we are creating this wet surface. Mine's very jagged and loose. And the desired amount of water that you want to have on your page to do this is enough that if you were to tilt it, you get this sheen. Let me see if I can show you. See that light kind of bouncing off of it? That's called a sheen, but not too much water where it pools and puddles in areas. So if it's starting to puddle in one area, if you tilt it, just dry off your brush on your paper towel and then just kind of mop it up and continue to move your brush around. That is the amount of water. A nice shine to your paper, but not where it's pooling in any sections. Now again, this Canson paper is not the greatest for this, but I wanted to show you on some of my more inexpensive supplies. But you just want to kind of control your water by having that nice light shine, the sheen to it, but not a pool. Okay, now I'm going to grab my other brush and I'm going to pick a color. You can do a sky color, you can do any color that you like. It does not have to be a sky to start. I'm going to pick this purple. And I'm going to apply wet paint to my wet surface just by tapping it and see that really cool like firework effect. Look at that. And you can just play with this. You can move your paper around like this and just kind of watch it bleed. And you'll also notice some colors explode a bit more than other ones. So you can just kind of move it back and forth. We can do our gradients like this. I'm going to wash off my brush. I'm going to grab a little bit of blue. Do the same thing. Let's see if it explodes the same. It does. Ooh. And you can kind of tap it in. And I'll show you how to kind of create a little bit of like clouds and stuff with this. Okay, and I'm just going to move that down. Okay. We're just mixing it together. Okay, I'm going to wash that off. And then I'm going to get some pink. Just colors that blend nicely together. Now I think it's starting to dry just a tad at the bottom. If you tilt your paper, you can see that it's starting to be less shiny there. That means that it's starting to dry, so you're not going to get that kind of firework effect. I'm just going to place it there like this. I'm just going to take some of the pigment off my brush and I'm just going to move it around. And applying wet paint to a wet surface, especially for like backgrounds and skies, really helps create that nice soft blurry effect. Okay, so I'm just gonna blend this out a bit more. I washed off my brush, dried it, just like we learned the other day in our other video. Just gonna blend it together, and then I'm gonna show you how I kind of create some clouds, some wispy, blendable clouds. Okay, so I'm gonna grab some blue or whatever color. You can even mix a little bit with purple, and I'm just gonna tap some dark clouds, just doing the wet on wet technique, and it's just they're gonna explode and look like these kind of fluffy clouds. Now, another thing that you don't want to run into, a little tip when doing the wet on wet technique, especially for something like this, like clouds, you don't want a lot of water on your brush. You don't want it to be dripping wet. I'm going to show you what's going to happen if you have more water on your brush than desired. So I have lots on there, and I tap it. See how there's this puddle all of a sudden forming, and you don't get those explosions. It just kind of sits there and just moves. That is not what you want. Once this dries, you're actually going to see this kind of bloom mark where it's kind of white and it blooms out. Now that's a fun effect to do when you're doing it intentionally, but if you're trying to create something like this, this is not desired. You want to make sure that your brush, and if this ever happens, it's okay. You can just take your paper towel and just kind of mop it up a bit. It's mopping up that color a bit, but that's okay. Just kind of blend it out and then grab your color again. Actual color, more color than water. And you can just tap it and go over it. Okay, it does happen. It happens to me at times too. But we're just tapping this color. Okay, getting some nice dark clouds. Okay, just tapping. And you're not using too much pressure, you're just gently tapping. Okay, again, not a lot of water. But you don't want your brush dry. You want it nice and damp, with more color than water. But it's when you get those water drops that is what really kind of repels the color. Okay, so you can create skies with this. If you didn't want to create a sky, actually, hold on, let's see if I can just blend the bottom of this out a bit. No, it's already dry. It's all good. If you didn't want to create a sky and you just really want to play around with the wet on wet effect, you can just, again, create your wet surface in your background. I'm just using my size 12. And what I used to do, I think I mentioned this the other day when we were doing the gradients, I used to create backgrounds of gradients. But if you also do the wet on wet technique, again, let's see, is it pooling in certain areas? Do we need to take some of it up? Yep, just going to move it around. Okay, and you can just create fun effects. Just watch them go. Just have fun with it. Use it as a therapy tool. I love this. This is so relaxing. Like, look at that. And you could just create these fun marks, almost like a tie-dye pattern. You could do some yellow. Maybe let's get some yellow. Make it look like it's tie-dye or something. It's really fun. And just play around with dropping color, okay? I love doing that. Like, just make a really cool, fun tie-dye effect. Just have fun with it, okay? So you can do more of a sky, or you could do just a background like this. Now, if you notice on this paper, like I said, Canson paper is not the greatest for this, but I do want to show you what it looks like with more inexpensive paper. This is not desirable. You're getting these kind of like hard marks. I mean, it's, you know what, it looks more like an abstract sky, which I kind of like. But I am going to quickly show you on my 100% cotton paper the difference that you can get, and I'm going to show you another couple exercises you can do with the wet on wet technique and how to use it in paintings. Okay, so here is my Etcher Lab sketchbook. I did mention them when I talked about supplies in the first video. I'm going to show you what wet on wet looks like with cotton paper, because it is quite a drastic difference. Okay, so I'm going to start by creating my background. Okay, so I'm just going to wet up the background. And the reason why I wet it up first before I add the color is just because it helps the colors blend better together. I'm just going to add my color, or my water. Okay, now I'm going to add the same colors just to show you the same sky, but on different paper. Okay, just going to move it. Like so. Move it around. Grab my blue. See, it explodes the same. It's so nice. Gonna blend that out together. Then I'm gonna grab my pink. Like so. Just blend that in. And it's also a lot easier to blend colors on better paper. Grab a bit more of that blue in the middle. Blend it. Okay. So now I'm going to grab my purple again and I'm going to show you those wet on wet clouds. Okay, so I washed off my brush and then I'm just drying it off on my paper towel, making sure that my color is still wet. If it feels a little dry, I'm just going to add a little bit of water to it just to make sure it's activated. I'm going to tap it on my paper towel just to make sure it's not too wet. Then I'm going to start tapping it in to my paper. And I just find that on better paper, it's just a little bit better controlled. So we're just tapping it in and you get this really nice blurry kind of effect. And then one thing, actually, I'm going to add kind of like a bit more yellow down there because I want to show you another effect that you can do. Because like I said, I like to use this for like out of focus, blurry effects in my paintings. Add some up here. Okay, let me wash this off. See how it's a bit better controlled than the other one was? Going to blend this out a bit. I'm going to add a bit of yellow, like it's a sunset. Like that. Okay, and if you feel like they're looking a little too veiny or they're just kind of coming out a bit too much and you want to control that just a bit, you want to refine it, you can wash off your brush, dry it, and then just gently, like how we learned with blending, just kind of move it around to kind of control the shape of that cloud. Really, really light pressure. And just blending it. Okay, now I'm going to show you, I'm going to do some trees, some evergreen trees in the background. Hold on, I just want to get a couple more little clouds here. Again, not a lot of water on my brush, just pigment. Okay, now I'm going to add some evergreen trees in the background that are dark, and they're going to be wet on wet, so they're going to be blurry. So I'm just going to grab, like a Paynes gray. And I'm just going to do these kind of vertical lines, and I'm just going to tap like this. So they're all blurred out. Okay, but this wet on wet effect makes it look like these trees are in the distance. Maybe it's a little bit foggy. Okay, they still look like they're kind of like evergreen trees because of that really cool wet on wet effect that you get. But they just look like they're out of focus. And I use this technique a lot. And then tomorrow when we do our wet on dry, which is layering, I'm going to use this exact same piece to create some more intense, sharper trees in the foreground. But for now, I just want to show you this really cool wet on wet, the way I use wet on wet a lot to get this out of focus, blurry effect. Okay, so again, not using a lot of water, mostly just pigment, just paint. Okay, might darken it at the bottom a bit. Okay, and just, there we go. And that's how I use wet on wet in a lot of my paintings. So just quickly, I just want to show you the difference in the skies of the paper. Okay, see how that's so much more controlled and condensed color. And because of the paper, it is fully the paper, you get these kind of funky bloom marks, which again is not bad. It's kind of cool in a stylized way, but this is just the difference between paper. So just keep that in mind. If yours doesn't look just like this or any of my other tutorials on my channel, it is most likely your paper. Okay, so that is the wet on wet technique. Again, practice some fun skies, practice just some backgrounds, maybe a tie-dye effect, and enjoy that. Now I'm quickly going to touch on a color bleed. And color bleeds are a lot of fun. I like to use them in my loose floral work. So I'm just going to show you, we're just going to be creating like an abstract piece with shapes. Okay, so pick some colors that go nicely together. Again, I think I'm going to stick with like my blue, purples, pinks kind of thing. And all you're going to do is you're going to just pick a color, create a shape. I'm going to do some circles. Okay, not a lot of water. Create a shape, and then you're going to wash off your brush, dry it a bit, grab your next color, so make sure your paints are wet, and you're going to create another shape right beside it, and watch, you're going to slightly touch it so the colors bleed together. So I'm just going right beside it, and then I'm going to slightly touch that blue one, and you get this color bleed where the blue is now moving in to the purple. Okay, it's very subtle, but watch, even if I do just like a clean, just water, and I touch the purple, see that bleed, how it goes into the next area that I was just painting, like that. That is a color bleed. Let's get some pink. And I'm going to touch this circle here. Watercolor and water wants to go where there is other water. So if they're touching, they're going to bleed into each other. Now, this is something to keep in mind when you are painting, so you can avoid it if this is something you don't want. So say you're working on something that's extremely detailed and you want that separation from the two colors. If one is still wet and it's touching the other, it's going to bleed into the other one. But so you're going to want to wait for whatever you're painting to dry before you move on. But if you do want that color bleed, make sure the other one is still wet and they can just bleed into each other like that. I love this effect. It's so pretty. And you can just create a really beautiful abstract piece by doing some shapes and just practicing this and just watching the colors run into each other. I love doing this. Let's get some pink over here. Now, if they start to dry, they might not bleed, okay? So just keep that in mind. If you touch and they just start to, they don't bleed as much, it might mean that that one color is starting to dry. So if you do want to color bleed, you have to work quite fast. Now, the way I use this in my floral work, if you've watched any of my loose floral tutorials, I like to create like a little petal, and then I'll have the stem slightly bleed into the petal. I can show you quickly. Okay, so say I have like a little bud here. Make sure it's not too pooled and puddly. I'm going to grab some green, and I will just touch the bud just very gently, and you get a really nice color bleed where it just looks like it's kind of encasing the bud. The stem is around it. And sometimes I'll even do like a leaf that's slightly touching the bud, and I'll just get a little bit of a color bleed that way. And that's just how I like to do my loose florals. Okay? But this is a really fun thing to practice. You can fill a whole page with it. And again, like we did with our color swatches before, if you want to do a whole page of these color bleeds and then cut them up into little gift tags or bookmarks or whatever, that's a great thing to do. So that is my lesson for the wet on wet technique and color bleeds. I definitely suggest you just practice and play around and have fun. If you're ever feeling like anxious or just having an off day, this is such a therapeutic way to paint. Just no pressure to create anything specific or, perfect. Just have fun and watch the colors dance. This is truly the whole essence of watercolor for me. This technique is what got me into painting with watercolor and what made me fall in love with it. So release that pressure of perfection and just have fun today. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it and you had some fun. Don't forget to check the description below for all the previous videos from our watercolor week, and make sure to check back tomorrow for our next video. I hope you guys are having fun and feeling a bit more confident with watercolor, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.